Welcome back to the show. I'm glad to be here today with my friend Jeremy Pitts. He's the managing director of Activate Houston. Activate is a nonprofit organization which awards the most promising science entrepreneurs into a 2-year fellowship to help them transform their research and technology into products that can benefit society. Activate Houston's newest cohort is launching in 2024, and they're seeking to build on the growing innovation ecosystem here in Houston and throughout Texas. They're very focused on the energy transition as well as other areas of high impact. So, Jeremy, you're a multi-time Houstonian. Tell us about what you're launching here today with Activate Houston.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think I'm a born again Houstonian. Is that am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Not a native, but
Yeah.
This is the second time I've been here now. So if I keep finding my way here, there must be something to it. So we're launching Activate in Houston. If those of you who aren't familiar with Activate, and I think a lot in Houston are not, we're an organization that's been around for about 8 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So we started as Cyclotron Road.
Mm-hmm.
We were embedded at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs in Berkeley, obviously. The whole concept was trying to kind of pull some of these amazing innovations kind of out of the lab and commercialize them, very much in line with a lot of the sort of commercialization focus that the national labs have and a lot of the government agencies have. And so they were able to, the founder, Alon Gur, was able to
Mm-hmm.
sort of tap into that and get some support for this program. So they launched in 2015. Activate spun out as a separate entity. Cyclotron Road still sort of exists, and at least with Activate's Berkeley location, they pretty much are in lockstep. The fellows tend to be Activate fellows and Cyclotron Road fellows there in Berkeley. But spinning out from being completely embedded at the national lab there kind of allowed Activate to broaden its reach, broaden its
Mm-hmm.
impact a little bit beyond just purely kind of what the Department of Energy wanted to focus on. So we expanded to Boston in 2019. And then we opened locations in New York, and our kind of remote first Activate Anywhere cohort, those both launched in 2021. And so we'll be launching here in Houston. I guess we sort of started laying the groundwork in 2023 with our first cohort next year. That'll be the fifth community for Activate.
Good. And I know it was a little bit of a topic of discussion of like if they're going to expand, why is Houston important on the roadmap? Is that something you can elucidate for us?
Yeah, I can give you my opinion on it. I mean, I was hired into the role after that decision was already made, but I think you look around at, obviously having a presence in Berkeley and Boston and New York already. Where do you go next to capture those sort of innovators and those kind of groundbreaking technologies? And Houston's at the top of the list, right? When you're thinking about energy transition, obviously there's some national debate on include or exclude the traditional energy companies, but Activate's very much on the side of like they need to be a part of the solution, and so that energy transition is happening here, and happy to dig into that more, and I expect we will. But I'm just sort of a part of the choir, I guess, when it comes to shouting all the things that Houston has going for it. So yeah, really, I mean, Houston is the place to be for sort of the next logical location for being part of that energy transition. And I think also when you look at Houston, it's got a lot of the things that Activate companies need. So sort of my secondary selfish motivation is potentially convincing some other Activate companies to move to Houston. I mean, the best current example of this is Fervo. So Tim Latimer and Fervo, Activate alums. And Tim launched that company with Jack Norbeck in the Bay Area. And they went through Activate in 2016, something like that. I forget, 2018, 2017, one of those years. And he moved his company to Houston. I mean, because that's where he needed to be, because he was building and he's scaling. And obviously he's very specifically looking for kind of oil and gas talent for some of the drilling and things that he's doing. But any of these businesses that are scaling and growing things and have lots of things flowing through pipes and are welding things together and all of that. Like as you scale those companies, like Houston's the place to be. So for Activate to kind of have a presence here, I think just makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And you're a multi-startup veteran. And instead of joining a startup, you decided to launch this. What really excites you about the role?
Yeah, I think about it a lot in terms of kind of leveraging up my impact or levering up my impact. So it's sort of the VC math, right? When you think about a VC, hey, I'm investing in these 10 companies and I need one to be a big hit and I make my returns. For me, it's like this role is really exciting because it's that same sort of math, but I'm not making money off of it. We're a nonprofit, but I'm having an impact based on that. And so I get to go be involved with these 10 and eventually when we get up to two concurrent classes, when we're sort of at full speed, 20, kind of roughly 20 fellows here in Houston. And I get to be a part of that and I get to participate and help these companies. And, I think it's awesome to be close to those technologies, potentially having an impact across all the different things that these fellows will be working on. And it's awesome for me because I just am curious and love to learn about different things. And so I get to get exposure to all of these different technologies and things that are going on. So just a lot that's exciting to me about the role.
And Jason mentioned you worked with 3 different startups. What do you think are kind of your strengths and what you've really learned from working in startups that you bring into Activate that these companies are going to really be able to benefit from?
Yeah. So, I spent the bulk of my career now working at a single startup. I spent 12 years slogging it out at one startup, which is a lot.
It is, yeah.
It's, painful at times to think about. And, it wasn't painful at the time, or not always, obviously. But I think, going through that experience, that sort of cradle to grave, like hard tech startup experience, you kind of understand how hard it is. I mean, we're looking at these fellows who are starting hard things. Like that's why we exist, is to support people who are starting hard things. And there are so many challenges over the years that you go through doing that. And so I think just having been through that, again, one sort of full cradle to grave 12-year experience, and then a couple other stints like working for other startups, just a huge number of lessons learned that it's really hard to get other than the been there, done that experience. And I just hope to be able to turn that and translate that into helping the fellows. And that's very much part of the Activate model. So my role, the managing director role, so I have a peer at each of the different communities who has that managing director role. And our jobs, above all else, are to support the fellows. And it's very much like a requirement of the job to have been through startups yourself. Because there's just really no way to support somebody and be able to empathize and be able to help them and be able to, hopefully steer them away from some of the mistakes that you've made without having that kind of direct startup experience.
Yeah, because, explain to us a little bit what you mean by fellows. Who's a fellow?
Yeah, so we call the participants in our program fellows. So Activate is a fellowship.
So it doesn't have to be like a PhD per se.
They just have to be jolly good.
But they're usually like researchers.
Right?
So we're looking for scientists, technologists. So it's typical that they have a PhD. I would say our sort of most common applicant is someone coming out of a PhD program or a postdoc. Often, they have been working on something in the lab, invented something, had some breakthrough, and they're like, hey, this could be, there could be something behind this, but they don't really know what to do with that. And maybe they're in the early stages of actually starting a company and negotiating licensing deals with the university, whatever they're doing. And that's where we can really help and support them a lot. But that's not a requirement. our only requirement is you can't be coming straight out of undergrad. You have to be at least 4 years of experience post-undergrad working on science, technology, research. So again, oftentimes that comes in the form of a PhD, and we obviously do take people straight out of a PhD program. But it can be career experience too, industry experience. And actually, I think that's something interesting about Houston. I think that the Houston ecosystem in general has a lot more mid-career entrepreneurs. Haven't seen any data or anything to specifically state that, but just sort of anecdotally, that's what I see a lot of. And obviously a lot of this is, guys starting their own oilfield services company and things like that. But I think that there are a lot of mid-career people in Houston, maybe people who are working for energy companies. There's a lot of PhDs hidden away kind of in these big office buildings at these different companies, who probably have a lot of ideas, and maybe some of them are looking to sort of do a little bit more energy transition stuff than traditional energy stuff. And we are happy to take and support those people.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. Like, we don't see Houston as like a startup hub, but you don't realize we still have a lot of entrepreneurs, like oil field services, suppliers to the industries, people who just get out there and start a business without having a PhD per se. And these people need support, right? They need the kind of structure and the skills that you provide.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of those are, not technology businesses, which obviously that's not what we're looking to support. But I do think, when you're mid-career, when you're, my age and you have kids and mortgage payments and all these other things that you're worrying about, it's really hard to start a startup.
Yeah.
And to go from a job and a career to nothing. And so we come in, I didn't talk about this in the start, but Activate, it's a 2-year program. We provide a stipend for 2 years. So on the order of $100,000 a year. So we pay your salary basically for 2 years, another $100,000 in R&D funding roughly. And then there's, professional development funds and travel funds, we'll pay for you to go to conferences and do things like that. And then all this sort of more traditional kind of things you would expect from accelerator type things, were lots of educational programming, learning what a cap table is and learning how to do a pitch deck and all this kind of stuff, and access to our network, all these other things that you get. But, specifically the salary part when you're looking at.
And I do think there's definitely a gap there because, people fresh out of college can go to all these other programs. But what about you when you are mid-career and you have some experience and then you're like, okay, I want to pivot or I want to start my own company. I have this idea, but I have 2 kids. And then you're able to provide them that safety net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see in our applicants and kind of as our class comes together, how much of that we get. And if, again, this is just sort of a hypothesis I have that there might be a little bit more of that kind of mid-career profile that we get in Houston than maybe we have in our other sites, but we'll see. Yeah. Ask me again in June. I'll tell you if I was right on that one.
Yeah, no, I definitely ran into a lot of entrepreneurs who, entrepreneurs, we're going to call them, who were in industry. They were definitely developing a technology, and they found that their business didn't necessarily want to take that technology further. And so they were looking for ways to construct a spin out, but they were technologists. They weren't necessarily business people. I'm not sure Activate solves the problem of technology might be locked inside a traditional energy company, but there's still that kind of expertise that someone wants to figure out how to make something into the world. I remember this one founder or wannabe founder like had this technology that was going to go into an ammonia factory, and it was going to take him. He was like, "Oh, I want to put this in $100 million refinery system." I was like, "Hold your horses! Like, I don't think I can help you with this because you have to start somewhere." But there was definitely that need. They had that same urge that I think a lot of founders have of this has to happen, and I just don't know how to. I don't see the pathway, and so I don't know where to go from here. And so that was one anecdote out of the maybe the hundreds or so I saw last year. But I think there's that definite sense that there's technology kind of locked up behind, and a lot of times, as we've talked about before, it's showing people there is a path, oftentimes unlocks for them that, it turns that switch on that they can do it too. Right.
Yeah. I would say organizationally, Activate is pretty knowledgeable and pretty good about helping to negotiate license deals with technology transfer offices at universities and research institutions. I'm not aware of having to ever do that with a corporation. So that could be interesting. I'm not sure if that's really something that would turn out well, but
that's a new skill set.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
It's funny how much sometimes, especially with like some of the bigger energy companies, you set it up as a win-win. Like they'll be on board if they can see that path, and we'll see what skill set gets developed here. But one of the things I want to go back to is I think part of the reason why all these benefits and get kind of thrown on the entrepreneurs is because the metrics are fantastic at Activate. And when I saw them, I was blown away. And the main metric of success, I think, is follow-on capital. But how do you guys measure success internally?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We're a little bit squishy on the way we think about this. So Activate, because we're a nonprofit, because we don't take equity, we don't charge fees, we don't make any money off of these fellows, which gives us a really unique opportunity to focus on fellows first and not the businesses. So we accept fellows into the program. We don't accept businesses. We don't accept companies. It's fellows. So it's a person that gets in. Oftentimes, or sometimes, maybe a quarter to a third come in with sort of a co-founder. But so our success is based on really the fellows doing well. And sometimes that doesn't always line up with business success, with commercial success. We hope that it does, because externally we're going to be judged by creating big, impactful businesses. But that's not how we measure success. And the way we really, really internally measure success, like we track, we track how happy the fellows are, kind of net promoter score kind of stuff even, right? Like we're asking them, how are you happy with the program? Are you happy with this? Like, is this adding value to you? Like, so our success is really the fellows' happiness. That said, we obviously track these metrics like follow-on funding. That's a great, in some ways, funding. I think anybody in the startup ecosystem knows some of that's a little bit of a vanity metric, but it's still directionally correct, I think. And I didn't look these up beforehand, so I'm remembering off the top of my head, but I think our number is 188 fellows that we've supported, which represents 145 companies. So again, some dual fellows for companies. I think it's close to 1.4 billion in follow-on funding. And the other number that I think is interesting is I think it's something like a 20x leverage on the dollars we put in. And so that, when you're thinking about our supporters, right, the government agencies that fund us, the philanthropy that funds us, if you're getting 20 times your dollar that you put in, like that's what these types of funders like to see. So it has been quite successful for us so far.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with the metrics. Like if you think about if this was a proxy for a venture fund, which it's not, but if you were to say dollars in to dollars out, like that's a very envious venture fund, right? In terms of the follow on and the return. So I think that's one of the metrics that stands out. But I think also you said 140 companies and having was it 1.6 billion?
1.4, I think, just shy of 1.4.
And just by contrast to Greentown that you're involved in, I think they're at like 500 companies and are at 3 billion. So just the focus of impact is so focused on those fellows, and you can see that outcome by these vanity metrics. And we all look at them and say, not every company needs to be a big returning company or a unicorn, but it shows you that this approach translates to impact just by removing barriers essentially from the founders and letting the fellows really take off.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. And I'm just forming a new thesis in my head as we're talking about this. the types of companies that we're supporting probably have to raise more money, frankly, right? Because we're looking for companies that are going to have global impact. Yeah. And so it's companies that need to, in order to do things at a scale that's going to have global impact, it costs a lot of money. So, obviously not to go down this first of a kind funding and all that stuff that's talked about a lot, but so, it's not surprising to see big dollar raises happening with some of our successful companies because they need it. Yeah. I mean, Fervo, right? Keep beating the Fervo drum here because they're the one Activate alum that people know of in Houston. Yeah. They've raised close to $200 million now, and they have to. They're building a 400 megawatt plant. Like, it's impressive stuff that they're doing. It costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's a nice proxy for, if it wasn't valuable, people wouldn't buy it. And that's really the goal. And
sure,
the reality is there's no such thing as a small energy company. Like, they have to be big to make that kind of global impact. So I think it's also a fair metric, even though it feels like a vanity metric.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on that global impact, like our audience who's listening and might want to apply to Activate program. What are some of the criteria that you use to,
we honestly, we cast a very, very wide net. And so we're looking for, so there's a couple like hard application criteria, like being 4 years removed from undergrad, like we talked about earlier, being a first-time founder. We're not looking to support serial founders. Feel like there are one or two like that I'm forgetting, but when you look at the areas that we support, it's a lot. We're looking for hard tech. We're looking, generally people are building something. They have a physical something, whether they're, it doesn't have to be a mechanical, physical, electromechanical thing, a lot of biologics and things like that, that I don't really understand yet, but I hope to learn. But so we talk about 16 verticals, that we will consider. And I couldn't list them off the top of my head. Feel free to check out our website, activate.org. But it covers just about everything, right? We're not supporting software companies. Software as a service, Uber for dog walking, that kind of stuff is not interesting for us. But we really think about it in terms of impact, right? So we're looking for companies that are solving big global challenges. So a lot of that ends up being generally in the sort of climate, sustainability, energy transition space. Just because that's a big global challenge, probably at the top of the list, frankly. But that's not only, we won't exclusively look at that. I think something like 70 or 80% of our companies, again, fit in that very, very broad sustainability bucket. But we'll look at life sciences companies. I actually think that's something in Houston that we might get a little bit more of, just because life sciences, it's Texas Medical Center. It's so huge here in Houston. Within life sciences, it's a little tricky because where we add the most value for a life sciences company, or the type of life sciences company that we can add the most value to, it's the non-traditional companies. So somebody who's developing a new drug, that's not for us, right? There's kind of a known development pathway, known steps, FDA approval, NIH funding, whatever. That's not for us. The things that are interesting to us are platform technologies. So, there might be a company that's got sort of some biologics innovation. Again, I don't really know what that means. I'm a lowly mechanical engineer, but figuring this stuff out. But maybe something that can apply to human health, but also has applications in agriculture, which is big in sustainability. We have probably the closest thing we have right now to a pharmaceutical company is a company that's developed a new therapy for heavy metal poisoning, which is interesting because, one, it's not like a clear go get NIH funding kind of thing, because like they're getting like DoD funding and DOE funding and like all kinds of different acronyms. But you think about all the like heavy metals that need to be mined, and those are often toxic and bad for people, and like being able to treat those is a big deal. And it also, they've got applications in sort of radiation poisoning. So, if nuclear takes off as a, part of the energy equation, like having some comfort in being able to treat that. And, the government maintains a stockpile of treatment for that stuff, which, by the way, is a really interesting funding mechanism for a company working in that space. So that's the sort of non-traditional piece I'm talking about, where there's different avenues. And that's where, we're sort of working outside the box, looking at these different applications and thinking broadly about these things versus like, here are the steps I need to take to get into clinical trials. We're also, I think we've got a couple quantum computing companies, some other things like that, which, probably have some, you can draw those lines to sort of connect that to sustainability oftentimes in terms of energy efficiency and, computing power for weather modeling and all these different things too. Yeah. So it's a pretty broad net that we cast, I will say.
And I guess, how are you finding fellows? Are you going to race and knocking in the labs? Yeah,
been knocking on a lot of doors the last few months. Yeah. So just to give a little timeline. So I started in this role at the start of August, and our application window, we operate on kind of an annual cadence. All of our locations go with the same cadence. We accept fellows once a year. We have a class, that get in and it's a 2-year program. So once we're up and running, we'll have sort of 2 concurrent classes. And so our application window started in mid-September and ran through the end of October. So it just closed. Sorry if you're looking to apply, you'll have to wait till next year, but I'd love to see your application next year. But so in launching in a new site, it's, we don't have the brand recognition that we do in Berkeley or Boston. So I was, not physically, I'm trying to think if I physically knocked on any doors, maybe not, but I, figuratively knocked on a lot of doors, just a lot of outreach. That we had sort of an advanced team, if you will, our expansions team that did a fair bit of work over the last 6 months, laying some of the groundwork, making some of the connections, letting people know. Is that like going
to universities?
A lot of, primarily that's where I focused for this time, just because I'm one guy. I am Activate Houston right now. So it was just, as much as I would love to tap more into the mid-career stuff and all of that, the universities is kind of the easier path. And so, getting people at all the local universities to spam their entrepreneur mailing lists or whatever they happen to have. And then, we went and did events and little information sessions at all the places. And we're casting sort of geographically, we're happy to cast a wide net as well. So it's not just Rice. It's not just Rice and UH. So we went to Texas A&M and UT. And I didn't do as much because I think these ecosystems are a little bit less mature right now, but Prairie View and Texas Southern are like really interesting institutions for us too, that we would love to tap into. And then even getting outside of the, greater Houston, Austin area, UT Dallas and SMU and Texas Tech and Baylor and UTEP and all these places. So started putting some feelers out, even, LSU and, Gulf Coast stuff. Like, I think Houston already is sort of the hub for all these places kind of when it comes to energy. And so we would love to sort of have that wide of a geographic reach as well for Activate, find the best and the brightest from wherever.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, Houston and in the past. So you obviously been in and around the innovation ecosystem. What do you think is going to be easier for startups going forward, versus a decade ago when we were all young?
Right. Yeah. So when I was running an energy startup in Houston a decade ago, there was nothing, right? We kind of worked in our bubble and we did our thing and that was it. And, it admittedly, some of the corporate venture existed. I mean, we had the company I was running, we had Chevron and Equinor on our cap table. So those guys were great and great partners and helped us pilot and do all these things that you hope to see. But there was certainly no climate tech summit. There was none of these things. There was no Greentown. There was no Ion. So, in a lot of ways, I feel like there's a lot of tailwind, I think, for people starting companies now in Houston. I know we've talked a lot. We kind of Houston as an ecosystem. I feel like there's been a lot of talk about some of the gaps, some of the early stage funding gaps, maybe. And I know Taylor and Deanna and Gabe just published that really interesting report that talks a lot about a lot of this stuff. Houston's got a chip on its shoulder. We don't get enough respect for climate, all this kind of stuff. But there's so much more than there was. Like there's been, I think this is one of the questions in their report, I think, right? Is the ecosystem better now than it was 5 years ago? And I think it was a resounding yes, because the Ion is there now. Greentown is there now. Investors occasionally show up in Houston now, right? The HX Venture Fund conference, a few months ago, like there was an impressive list of people that like flew in to come to that conference. Now, I imagine a lot of them were because HX was one of their LPs and they said, you have to come to this conference. But I think by and large, they're still interested in meeting some of the Houston companies. And so we're starting to see more of that. And there's an ecosystem around it, and it's just that snowball effect, right? It's starting to grow, and I think it's great.
Yeah, and Activate's coming. So
Activate's coming.
The snowball keeps getting bigger.
Yeah, well, and I think we fill an interesting gap in the ecosystem. This idea of the early stage funding. At that HX Venture Fund conference, I forget who said it. If it was. It might have been Tim, actually, Tim Latimer. It was one of our kind of all-star entrepreneurs, whether it was Tim or Trevor Best or Moji or one of these guys, said Houston is a great place to scale a company. It's not yet a great place to start a company, right? And this goes back to this, is the early stage capital here. We're seeing a few funds, there's a little bit, but not a ton. So that's a gap that hopefully Activate can fill, right? So we can find those most promising, really early stage, really impactful technologies and support them. Admittedly, our reach is not that massive, or our breadth maybe is a better word. We can only support 10 fellows a year. But what I hope to see is that while we kind of help build the ecosystem by directly supporting those 10, I hope we can indirectly support a lot more, because we start showing that there are quality companies being started in Houston, and that does get the investors to come to Houston, and we get, we pile on top of Greentown, the events Greentown is doing, and other things like that, and you get, more and more of this sort of access to capital and different things happening, just because that ecosystem starts maturing. And so even for those companies we can't directly support, hopefully that by helping to grow the ecosystem and maybe growing the access to early stage capital, I hope we have a bigger impact and we help fill that gap.
What's your vision for Activate in Houston, 10 years down the line?
I mean, just kind of coming fully up to speed and doing the things that it's already doing in Berkeley and Boston, just being, hopefully finding some really successful, really impactful. I mean, going all the way to 10 years, I hope that we have some really, really successful alumni.
Yeah.
So obviously we want to keep finding and promoting and encouraging these early stage founders, but our alumni network is very strong. The alumni, they're still on our Slack channels. They still are. Somebody posts a question on Slack about, has anybody been through this? And you see half a dozen alumni chime in and help and give thoughts and make connections and stuff. But you hope to see more and more of those companies actually start hitting that scale and start, commercializing. And
because you said you're starting with 10 fellows a year in a cohort. Is that going to increase? Will you have more cohorts with time?
No, the number of fellows per year won't increase. I think we've found that sort of 10 fellows per location per year is about as much as you can sort of handle with the model that we have. where it's a single managing director that's kind of supporting and mentoring that, and kind of a, small local staff that helps kind of operationally support that. So as Activate scales, it's adding new communities is how Activate is scaling.
Forming these partnerships.
We'll open in new locations. As well.
So Dallas could get one if they were very good.
Probably not. Nothing against Dallas, but it's a little close to Houston.
Yeah. Isn't it? It's still like 3 hours away by East Coast standards. It's like 3 states.
Yeah, that's true. But
Texas is a big state.
Yeah.
I think you'll see there's a whole lot of country that's not covered by Activate currently.
Sure.
Yeah.
And our Activate Anywhere is by far our most popular in terms of application numbers, because there are a lot of people that don't live in Berkeley, Boston, New York, or now Houston that still want access to a program like this. So you see, we have 3, well, I think one just moved, but we had 3 fellows from Madison, Wisconsin. Like there's stuff going on in Madison, right? Like
there is a little nexus down there.
They're
all climate people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's good stuff going on. And so, maybe we have a location in the Midwest. Maybe we have a location in the Rocky Mountain region. Maybe we have a location in other places. I don't know. I can't speak to that, but that's where we would see our sort of growth.
Yeah. It's like you're gonna if they move out of the US, but like Calgary is such a big energy hub up there. It's funny how many startups we see coming back and forth between Houston and Calgary. True. It's like that would be my natural, if you think about an energy hub.
Harder to do when you're primarily government funded.
US government funded. So,
but I don't know. Call the Canadian government and see if they want to launch Activate Canada. I don't know.
Well, as a tangent, there's a lot of grant funding for the startups in Calgary, which is I think why we see so many technologies being built there. And then they realize the state of Alberta is like, I think as a province is smaller than Houston. So they end up coming down here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like in terms of population.
In population.
Not in terms of size. And the industries here. But it's a lot of good technologies keep coming from out of there. Anyhow, but when you think about, we talked about the Houston innovation ecosystem. Are there any like hidden gems that you discovered recently that people really need to know about? Because everyone already knows about Greenton and Ion at this point, I hope.
Oh, geez. That's a good question.
This doesn't have to be like innovation focused.
Could be a good restaurant.
I mean, we talked about a ranch at one point on the show.
A ranch?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Or like a park, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that any bubbled to the top of mind just now. Can I have elementary age kids? So
What's your favorite thing to do in Houston with them?
With the kids, yeah.
I mean, I'm generally just getting dragged around from one activity to the next. So it's soccer season right now. So been spending a lot of time at the soccer fields. Spring Branch Memorial Sports Association, great program. So.
Yeah, we don't realize what a big soccer community there is in Houston.
I honestly don't know. I just know in this one SBMSA program, they probably have, I don't know, it's hundreds of kids per age group. I don't know. I think in my younger daughter's like U8 age group, there's probably, I don't know, 20 teams, something like that, times however many 10, 12 kids per team. I mean, that's a lot of kids in this program.
Kids. Yeah.
Just kind of in that like Spring Branch sort of west side area.
Yeah.
And in Gem, really competitive soccer.
Competitive
soccer fields. Nice facilities though.
Get
to play under the lights, especially with the time change. We're there for
as long as you're not playing in the summer, it's nice. This summer was bad.
We started up in September. It was pretty brutal.
I gotta ask, just because I'm curious, what did you guys do for Halloween?
Just standard trick or treating around the neighborhood. Nothing special.
No family outfit.
No, I'm the worst. I'm bad at Halloween. Even when I was a kid, I was bad at dressing. It was always cold when I was growing up, I feel like, and so it was like not even worth trying to do a costume because you always just had a parka on. And I'm like a kid of the 80s and 90s. And so it was like the starter jacket era where you always had like the sports team jacket. So that was I was always a well, I guess nobody cares now because it's not offensive here, but I was always a Denver Broncos fan because I grew up in that part of the country. So I would just wear my Broncos coat, my Broncos hat and everything and just go trick-or-treat through the blizzard.
They're just happy.
Get the candy.
Did you guys do anything?
Yeah, we did. We just went around the neighborhood. I didn't dress up, but my kids did. And it was fun.
So my neighborhood doesn't do trick-or-treating because like they're all old people. But we had this like 2 kid families show up and they showed up with an app. I was like, oh, these houses are all doing the trick-or-treating.
Oh, is that on Nextdoor?
I guess. I don't know. I was amazed with like the technology. They were harvesting all the places to hit up for the candy. And I guess because we have so few visitors, we put out the like full-size bars and they knew what they were getting. Like they were like, this is the house that does it.
Did they was it like Waze style where they could report back to the app like this house has full-size candy bars?
But they were like, we know that you guys do good candy. I was like, how do you know? We didn't post anything.
Go to this
Magic
house.
Technology.
Yeah. I didn't know what to expect when I was giving out candy. And so I bought a lot. And my wife was traveling, unfortunately. So I was out with the kids trick-or-treating and I just left the bowl out. And for those like earlier hours of trick-or-treating when it's the younger kids, I think they're all really good because they're with their parents and they take one piece. And so we got back and like, it was like, felt like it was barely touched. And so then I left it out later and, I would peek out the window and you'd see like a couple older kids, teenagers, whatever, show up and they just like scoop out the candy. And I was like, both like very upset by this because I'm like, that's not fair that they're like taking all the candy. But then I was like, I have all this candy that I do not want in my house. So I was like upset, but I was also happy. It was very, very conflicting emotions. I kept refilling the bowl and more teenagers would show up and steal all my candy. And I was like, I'm so mad at you, but thank you. And put more candy out.
Gotta get rid of this candy.
It was a strange night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Real roller coaster of emotions for me.
The moral of the story, Houston is good for families. That's where we're going with this.
There were so many kids on the street, where we were. Yeah, it was great. It was really nice. And the weather was it
really got cold for 2 days.
Yeah.
Just for Halloween.
It was perfect, right? Like Halloween night was perfect. I really didn't want to sweat on Halloween. Like it's like that's the worst.
Yeah.
I'd rather a blizzard than sweating for Halloween.
Yeah, so we like to ask everyone if they have a personal climate impact story or like what motivates you, why do you care?
Yeah. Interesting question. And I probably don't have a great one. I spoke on a panel of this little, when I was in recruiting mode, I was up in Austin and they had this little student club energy conference thing. And I spoke on a little panel and one of the panelists in like our pre-meeting brought up this really question that I thought was really interesting, which was, and this was energy, not just startup climate stuff, but was, did energy find you or did you find energy? And I think kind of turning that to, did sort of climate impact stuff find you or did you find it? And I think for me, it kind of found me, so I straight out of undergrad, started working in aerospace, big company stuff, did that for a year, didn't like it. And then just sort of had a buddy working for a solar startup. And he said, hey, we need some good people. And so I just kind of fell into that. And that was kind of just the first of a series of like, just opportunistic things. Something came along and I just jumped on it. And, but you start doing that and you're like, hey, this feels good. Like I remember this was in California in Pasadena. And I remember like walking down the street at lunchtime or something. And there'd be these like Greenpeace people out there. And they're like, oh, do you have a minute for the environment? Because they want to give you their pitch and ask you for money and get you on their mailing list or I don't know, whatever they do. And I was like, I'm actually spending 40 hours a week on the environment, actually. But thanks for asking. Yeah, I was like, I'm pretty sure I have a bigger chance for having impact than you do. But so I don't know. It makes you feel a lot better about yourself when you wake up and you're, trying to make energy more accessible and cleaner than when you're, in my case, building weapons systems. Just the targeting part. I never built the actual weapon, just the optics. And then, I went back to grad school, and after grad school kind of stumbled into something that was more in traditional energy, but still had an interesting kind of, emissions reduction angle that we sort of played up and took. And that just has been kind of a series of like finding my way into that. And after doing that a couple of times, it's like, hey, I like this. I want to focus on this. And I think in my personal life, I try to be more cognizant of that. I call myself a closet environmentalist. I won't ever like get in front of anybody with my opinions on these things. But when I had to replace my air conditioner at my last house, I put in a heat pump because why wouldn't you? Like, it's just a little bit more, and it's a lot better.
So Jeremy's at the disadvantage that I know a lot about him. You also like went off meat recently, right? Was that climate related at all?
When I started, it was like 80% health and 20% climate. And now I'm not as good about it, but it's probably 20% health and 80% climate. And I definitely avoid beef because beef is the worst from a climate perspective if you look it up. But I hardly eat meat anymore. Mostly for that. But again, it's like I'm not like militant about it. I think the flexitarian, I think is kind of the best. A little bit less is better than none. I haven't bought an electric car yet though. So haven't quite, but I still drive my old 10-year-old cars, the same cars that I had back in Boston a lifetime ago.
Me too, actually. My little white car I still have. I don't know if you remember that one. So
I wonder with cars, like, the new cars are maybe more energy efficient and all of that, but at the same time, it's like, it's also environmentally better to not buy new cars, right? And keep the car that you have.
I actually think about that a lot. I've never like tried to figure out how to do the math on that, but I'm like, and I have small, like, fuel efficient cars, and well, depending on the day, don't drive that much. I don't know. Sometimes I've got 3 different meetings in different corners of Houston that I do end up driving a lot, but I'm not doing like a 40-mile commute every day. I agree with that. Like drive these cars into the ground.
I mean, there's so many things that we can do in terms of like consumerism and just buying less, right? Like especially here in the US, it's like, oh, we need a new this, a new that, and there's always a new iPhone to buy. But some things it's easier for us to cut, like meat maybe, but what about like the daily decisions that we make?
No, my wife definitely wants a new car every 5 years, and I'm like, next one's gonna be electric for her, but
and that one's gonna stay.
And that's a personal like that's just what her buying cycle is. So let's see. I'm looking at the clock a little bit. When we think about like what you guys are doing at Activate, and you think about like the global energy transition, do you think like the country has the technology it needs to meet its like climate goals? That's a big question.
Yeah, that is a big question. I mean, I think there are a lot more knowledgeable people than me on that question. I mean, I think, the way I view the climate problem is it's like there's a place for everybody and everything. Like it's such a big problem. I mean, if we just stopped developing new technology today and just deployed at a massive scale all the technologies we already have, could we solve the climate problem? Maybe, but could we solve it better with technologies that are going to get developed over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Almost for sure, yes. So I think there's a place for all of it. And we need to deploy the stuff we have at a massive scale. We need to develop new and better stuff. I don't know. I guess there's a number of areas that don't have good solutions yet.
Yeah, well, share with us like where you're seeing the gaps.
I mean, less so specifically from just my work at Activate because I'm so new to it, but just generally kind of trying to keep an eye on this. So I was doing some consulting work before Activate for a company that was well, they were doing a number of different things, but I was working on an industrial heat pump for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so really got a chance to do a deep dive on more of the industrial decarbonization and industrial heat. And that's a huge problem, right? So I think there's a lot of deployment challenges there. There's a lot of technology, like, gosh, I'm going way deeper trying to remember numbers off the top of my head, but I want to say something like 20% of the world's emissions are related to industrial heat, like heating things up for some sort of industrial process. It's a huge number. It roughly, very, very roughly, like plus or minus 10% kind of numbers, roughly breaks down into about a third is like low temperature, less than 100 degrees C. About a third is like medium temperature, 100 to 500 degrees C, and about a third is like over 500 C. And so you look at that, and below 100 C, like there are commercial heat pumps today that, at scale with, big name brand companies like, Siemens or MAN or whoever that make these things and are deploying them. To my knowledge, very, very minimal installations in the US, a few in Europe. But that's a deployment challenge. Can those heat pumps get better or more efficient? I mean, maybe a little bit, but they just need to be rolled out. The 100 to 500 C is harder. At those temperatures. You have to directly electrify. The particular technology I was working on was a high temperature heat pump that could actually get up to 400 or 500 degrees C. And so that's why I know these particular numbers, because that was the pitch I was trying to give. But there's direct electrification, right? Which is not the most efficient thing, but you can get temperatures that hot and much hotter. So there are ways to electrify. I think the thermal battery space is a really interesting space because and there's a shout out to Activate alum Antora and Electrified Thermal Solutions, both in that space, along with companies like Rondo that are starting to do really well and starting to scale up and deliver, where they basically, this idea of energy storage, where you're taking electrons and storing it in whatever form, if it's a battery, if it's heat, if it's, water at some elevation or water down in a hole in the case of company like Quidnet, whatever, and then converting it back to electrons. Well, you don't need to convert it back to electrons if you're just going to use it as heat. And so this idea of take one of the parts of that round trip efficiency off and just convert electrons to heat and then use it as heat makes a ton of sense. Especially when you can get really, really cheap electrons off of, solar. And you can deploy these things off grid, so you can go, build your new plant. Historically, we saw so like industry popped up, historically where there was energy, right? So that's why factories are along rivers, right? Both because they could, go way, way back, right? The water wheel is cranking and mechanically running the machines in the factory, and then also a convenient place to dump their pollutants in the river too, maybe.
I thought you were going to go with shipping, so you could ship it down the river. Well, pollution.
Maybe that too, yeah. little of all of that. But so, you imagine factories of the future, they don't need to be there. They need to be where there's ample sun or ample wind and dealing with the intermittent stuff, like store that as heat and then use that heat over the day and then make new heat the next day. And I think we'll start seeing an evolution and that kind of stuff.
Can you educate me a little bit there? So like the electrification, is it both a combination that you can source the energy from like a renewable source, like solar and wind? And is the heat storage because you don't need the heat all the time and it just takes a while to heat stuff up and cool it down?
Yeah. So those guys are, they're using direct electrification. So they're using resistance heating. So it's a toaster, right? It's a big fancy toaster and really cheap, simple storage material. So they're storing heat in bricks, right? Or ceramic, or they all have slightly different flavors of it and slightly different ways that they're generating the heat, but it's all direct electrification. So there are ways to get more efficient there, right? Heat pumps, but you can't get to the temperatures. So these guys are storing heat at 1,000, 1,500, degrees C, really high temperatures. And yeah, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think the way their math works out to make these make sense is you need really cheap electricity. So you need the 3 cents per kilowatt hour solar, or whatever the number is. And when you have abundant, cheap electricity, you make heat, and then you've got that heat stored.
You can be the offtake essentially for cheap solar.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Or like I say, or when you can't, when there's however many huge amounts of solar installations just waiting for grid connection, you don't have to be connected to the grid. You can just build solar on site and directly use those electrons and turn it into heat. And then heat up your process, make steam, or directly heat, or whatever your process is. There's an interesting company that I saw that's trying to deploy boilers. So I think, again, trying to remember the numbers, about 1/3 of industrial heat goes towards making steam, and using steam for various processes, conveying the heat through steam. So electrifying boilers is again, electric boilers have been around for many, many years, but they're not terribly efficient. So making a heat pump version of that is a big deal.
Interesting.
So that's all interesting.
Yeah.
I think agriculture is a big space that still has a lot of needs, right? Cow farts or cow burps, whatever they are. Or, I mean, what wasn't it like a third of? Isn't it a third of methane emissions, or like transportation, power, and cows, or agriculture in general? I don't know that space very well, but to my knowledge, we haven't figured out a way to bottle up cow farts yet. So
this is why companies like Tender Foods are a climate tech company, because you're removing the cow, right?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I personally don't think it's that hard to just stop eating beef, but
it's hard because they're tasty. Anyhow, let's see. So I think as we're winding down, sorry, this is a legacy question here. What is the one thing the audience could do to help you out, now that you've heard about Activate and what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have asked me that a month ago, I would have said, just get the word out, just help promote Activate as much as we can, within Houston and broader Texas, to just find those, innovators, scientists toiling away in some sub-basement lab somewhere that, don't come up for air very often. Like, we want to find those people who are coming up with those innovations, and help them turn that into real companies, real products, and commercialize that and have an impact. Now that my applications are closed and I don't have to think about that again for a year, a lot of it is just, hey, if you are in a position to help support those types of fellows, those types of entrepreneurs, reach out. I'm sort of a professional networker right now, just trying to build the ecosystem. And as much as possible, the deeper my Rolodex is of different experts and people in various things, whether it's, investors, or whether it's potential advisors, industry experts, people who are knowledgeable in various technologies, the more that we have a network, and Activate has a sort of national network and stuff, but obviously it's not as deep in Houston, and I'm trying to grow that. So the more opportunity we have to call the right person and connect the right person with our fellows, the more we increase the chances for them to be successful.
Good. Go ahead.
No, and how can people get in touch with you?
I don't know. I don't know if I want to give out my email address. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty visible on LinkedIn.
And Activate has a website they can visit. Right?
Activate.org. Yeah, lots of information there. To go check us out. But yeah, you can find me and my LinkedIn. Interestingly, on the team page on the Activate website, the managing director section, my head is like 3 times bigger than everybody else. And I'm not.
Jeremy, I got something to tell you in real life.
I mean, in real life, it's maybe 1.5 times bigger. You don't have to like accentuate that. I don't know what to make of that. If I should be flattered or offended or what. But yeah, so go find the guy with the big head on the managing director section of the website. And I think there's a LinkedIn link there.
Good. Well, thanks for being with us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. It's fun.
All right.
Thanks, guys.